Hello, welcome. On behalf of the BOMA Greater Dallas Education Committee, I am pleased to host a Insurance Basics PowerPoint with Stephanie Todd. Stephanie Todd is a colleague of mine as she was working with HPI Commercial Real Estate, and she has 15 years of commercial property insurance experience, and as well as 2 years experience as working in the CRE industry. Thank you, Stephanie, for hosting this with us. I believe it's very important that we discuss insurance basics with BOMA, and it's a great learning tool for everybody. I'm ready to get started when you are.
Okay, thanks for having me, Elena. I'm ready to talk to you about Insurance 101. So what is insurance? We don't want you to overthink this because truly insurance is a contract between a company and an individual or business to provide a guarantee of compensation for a specific loss in return for the payment of premium. And what that does is ultimately we're trying to protect business owners and managers in the event of a loss. Why do we collect policy information and copies of endorsements? Well, it's important that we collect them to provide proof that a tenant or a vendor has the coverage specified in their lease or their contract. The different types of liability insurance it's very important that you understand these terms and what they mean. General liability policies protect businesses from claims alleging bodily injury, property damage, completed operations, personal injuries, libel, and slander. An auto liability policy is going to protect the insured against damages suffered by others in an accident caused by the tenant, the vendor, or their employee. A workers' compensation policy provides wage replacement and medical benefits to employees that are injured in the course of their employment. An umbrella policy or excess liability insurance is designed to protect against big losses. It extends coverage over the underlying policies. Typically, that's the general liability, the auto, and the workers' compensation policies. Liquor liability describes a business's responsibility for their guests' physical well-being and property while the guests are consuming alcohol. And finally, the most common liability insurance that we see in this industry is errors and omissions insurance. That protects companies against the full costs of a claim made by a client against a professional for claims of inadequate work or negligence, typically for a person who provides advice or services such as a consultant, a financial advisor, an insurance agent, or a lawyer. Now we have some different types of commonly used forms that we're going to talk about next. And the first one that we're looking at is a certificate of liability. It's also called an Accord Form 25. And what we really want you to be familiar with here are all the different valuable information that's on this one form. And I also want to point out that at the very bottom of insurance forms, usually the bottom left corner is going to tell you what form number that we're talking about. And that is true for Accord forms, but also for company-specific forms. You can usually find the form number at the bottom left corner. So this certificate of liability insurance is going to point out or going to capture the information such as the agent's name and their contact information, as well as the insured name, which would be our tenant or vendor, and the company that insures them. That's all going to be at the top part of that Accord form. And then down the left side, you'll see the different policy lines. So general liability, auto, work comp, umbrella, and across this form, it's going to list not only the type of insurance, the policy number, the policy term, and the limits of coverage. Now, we use the description of operations box for special wording, such as additional insured, waiver of subrogation, primary non-contributory language, and you can also find which underlying policies are covered by an umbrella policy there. Finally, at the bottom left, you see the certificate holder information. Another form that is used in the industry and is acceptable in lieu of the Accord 25 is a memorandum of insurance, and that has the almost exact same information as the Accord 25. Now we want to talk about types of commercial property insurance. What does property insurance cover? And usually you're going to see this for your tenants, and it should be tenants only, and it provides protection against most risks to property, such as fire, theft, and some weather damage. The leases usually require property coverages that are replacement cost coverage written on a special form. Those property coverages include business personal property, which is also called contents, and that includes everything from pens to desks to small manufacturing equipment. Another example of commercial property insurance that we see a lot in this industry is business income and extra expense. Business income coverage covers the net income, the net profit or loss before the income tax. That would have been earned plus continuing normal operating expenses incurred, including payroll. Leases usually require a 12-month period of restoration, and what that 12-month period of restoration means is how long the policy is going to pay. The tenant improvements and betterments is coverage for permanently installed fixtures and improvements that a tenant has installed at their own expense. Law or ordinance coverage is the coverage for a loss that's caused by enforcement of ordinances or laws regulating the construction or repair, usually related to a change in the code, such as handicap accessibility or an upgrade to plumbing or wiring. Flood insurance is usually a separate policy from a commercial property policy. It's important to remember that flood insurance will respond to a loss related to rising or rushing water. I want to point out to you that broken pipes and sprinkler system leaks are not covered under a flood policy. Earthquake coverage can usually be endorsed onto a commercial property policy, and these policies will cover property damage that occurs as a result of earth movement, and that includes commercial equipment and machinery as well as inventory. The next form that I want to talk about is an evidence of property form, and you see this on both Accord 28 and Accord 27. Both of those are acceptable. I prefer the Accord 27, but because I think that captures the information in a better arrangement. What we have right here is an Accord 28, and very similarly to the Accord 25 that we showed you earlier, it's going to have your basic agent contact information as well as information about the carrier, and there will be basic policy information about that commercial property policy. It's going to show business personal property, if it's special form, which is what's required on most leases, business income and extra expense. We've highlighted replacement cost, ordinance or law, earthquake, flood, and wind and hail. Those are all commonly called out in leases. And at the bottom, I also want to point out to you again that your form numbers are easily determined. They're spelled out for you at the bottom left corner of your commercial insurance forms. So the advantages that you have when you're looking at this Accord 27, which is the commercial, the evidence of property insurance that I prefer, is that an agent can type out the actual coverages, the amounts, the deductibles. I think it's easier to read than those small boxes. Tenant improvements and betterments is omitted usually on an Accord 28, but on Accord 27, agents and their software just have an easier time, I think, being picked up on an Accord 27. Just like the other Accord form, it'll show, or the agents can show special form, replacement cost, tenant improvements and betterments, ordinance or law, business income, and also the business personal property. And finally, not only do we see a certificate holder box, but again, there's your form number at the bottom left corner. So now we're going to talk to you about the importance of collecting endorsements, especially your additional insured and the waiver of subrogation. I've included samples of the additional insured endorsements, and I'm going to review those for you real quickly. The CG 2010 is an endorsement that you're going to see for contractors only. And if you look at the bottom left, that's where you see CG 2010. So that's how you know what form number we're talking about. And then also it's spelled out for you on the top of the page. That's the additional insured for owners, lessees, or contractors. So that right there tells you that we're going to be talking about contractors here and not the relationship with the building owner, manager, or the lessor. The next endorsement that you might see is the endorsement for additional insured for completed operations, and we refer to that as CG 2037. And you can see that form number again, bottom left corner of your page, and it's spelled out across the top, additional insured, owners, lessees, and contractors for completed operations. It is a common mistake for agents to send us the CG 2010 rather than the CG 2011. And when we're asking for a CG 2011, we are talking about the relationship there with a tenant, the tenant and the owner, the manager, the lessor of the premises. And if you read in this endorsement, it does go on and talk about what's in the lease and not what's in a contract. And that's how you know that you have the correct endorsement, when the relationship is a tenant and not a contractor. The waiver of subrogation can be for either tenants or vendors. We see it on liability policies, the GL, the auto, and the work comp. And this that we have here is a waiver of subrogation for a general liability policy. And you can see very clearly the heading of this page is a waiver of transfer of rights of recovery against others to us. The next example that I have is a waiver of subrogation on a workers' compensation policy. Most often, if your tenant or your vendor is doing business exclusively in Texas, Texas Mutual is the largest workers' comp carrier in the state. And so most often you're going to deal with Texas Mutual and their forms. And if you look at this form, again at the top, it tells you Texas waiver of rights to recover from others. And the bottom shows you the policy number and the name. And these always should match whatever is on the certificate.
All right, Stephanie, I think we're reached the last slide of the presentation. And so our committee has put together most asked questions regarding insurance. So I'm going to read them off and then you give us your answer. When a contractor is working directly with a tenant, how should we handle the tenant insurance?
So I would suggest that you request a copy of the contractor's certificate and that you should require the limits equal to or greater than the limits that are required of the tenant. Additionally, the tenant should be named as an additional insured with a waiver of subrogation.
This leads us to our next question. How long should we retain a COI once it has expired?
Well, there's all kinds of thoughts or theories about how to handle this. And what I would just remind you of is that proof of insurance can make or break a case. So digital storage now, it's super easy to just keep record. And therefore, I recommend that you always keep a certificate.
Thank you. For our third question, how do you document a tenant that is self-insuring?
So that's pretty easy, but it's often overlooked. What you should do is request a self-insurance letter annually and save digitally, and you might even want to keep yourself a hard copy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate you taking this recording and going over the basics of insurance. We hope this is a great guideline for future BOMA members and CRE members as well. Thank you.